Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today we're going to have another fantastic and incredible episode for you guys. So sit back and enjoy. So today we're going to be discussing, is Kamala a communist? Because this is now the new line that the Trump campaign and other Republicans are going with in terms of Kamala. And it's primarily inspired by her price control new policies that she just proposed last week. And I got two convolute questions about this. One was from New England Refugee and another was from Tom. Both were asking for my thoughts on the price control. So I'll give my spiel about, or my pitch for the convolute right now. So if you would like to ask it, or if you like to ask questions or suggest guests or any other topic discussions, you can sign up for the convolute option at Highly Respected Substack, and that's at highly-respected.com. And make sure to sign up for the IQ supplements if you haven't already. So I'll read the question specifically. Tom asks, he asked, what do you think of the mainstream media's reaction to Kamala's price gouging comment? Their shift from cheerleaders to mild critics, even if momentary, hints at how they might react to an American Chavez. We will get to that. And then New England Refugee says, Kamala is proposing price controls. This has never worked. Even normie friends identify that as, I think he means as communists. Who is this aimed to sway? I personally can't see swing voters, independents believing this will benefit the country. So we'll go into those questions. I'll first address New England Refugee's side of the question. New England Refugee may be a little bit more optimistic about the people than a lot of others. Because for a lot of people, they don't think very deeply about this. They're not very informed about this. And we have to say, is like price controls are just bad. It's an imposition on the market to where you're going to get inferior services. It's going to wreck the economy. I mean, the fact is, if you want to command an economy and you want to see what the results are, you can look at communist countries from the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact and how that implemented with their price controls. It's a complete disaster. It also erodes competition and ensures only, the few giants can survive in that measure. It takes away the profit motive. It takes away the ability to offer products that people would actually like. It's just bad all around. And it's not even a solution to it. It is just saying, it's just hoping that people are so stupid and saying that the government can do this and say, we're controlling your prices. And then people are just going to be completely happy with it. It probably wouldn't hold up in court. I don't think that Kamala has the ability to implement this. This is really just her part of her campaign of just being whatever people want. And it is a decent strategy what she has right now. She's offering mild social policies, or pretending she's going to get tough on the border, pretending she cares about crime, those things that can appeal to a large segment of population. Meanwhile, offering a type of pseudo-populism, saying we're going to give you all this money if you try to buy a home, or we're going to have a very generous child tax credit, and we're going to control prices too. We're going to really go after these greedy corporations that are price gouging, which just isn't new. Because Biden, when he was, the line that the White House had on inflation and any other things that when people were struggling with prices was to blame greedy corporations and saying that they're gouging prices rather than looking at the general market picture and anything else that's going on. They're just pretending that the corporations are really greedy and want to punish the people, and we're going to get them under control, which isn't really the part of the problem. But that's always been the answer from the Biden administration. So this isn't totally new. It's not unprecedented. This is what they've always been going with. And it's a decent strategy. I don't think it's as bad of an idea to propose this. I think it's a terrible idea, actually, for our country and our economy to propose this. And it is very extreme. But I think for the average voter, a lot of them are not that bright and will think it's a great idea. And a part of the strategy that Kamala is going with is just bribing the public. into we're going to give you a lot of free stuff. We're going to use the government to make everything cheaper, and we're just going to promise all these goodies that you wouldn't believe were at your disposal now or before, but now they will be with Kamala. It is very much we're bribing the public strategy that she wants to go with. But so I think for a lot of middle-class voters, they may get wary of it. The more educated professional types that are becoming a stronger element of the Democratic Party, they are going to be more leery of this idea. But for the not so well off people that they're trying to win over, I think it's a better strategy to get them. Because and when you're seeing the mainstream media attack this, and Washington Post editorial board came out with this, so I think even New York Times columnists were criticizing it. CNN had some critical remarks of it. It was not well received in the media because the media is generally reflecting elite establishment opinion. And it's also reflecting the opinion of a lot of the middle class professionals that Kamala is trying to win over. And they know this is idiotic. They can't go out and find an expert who's going to be like, this is a brilliant idea. It's going to do wonders for our economy. Every expert is going to say this is a disastrous idea for our economy. And even they had a New York Times or Washington Post columnist who's been very much a Kamala shill, who is even saying that this will make the communist line against Kamala stick, if you're proposing price controls. And so when Trump calls her a communist for this, the shoe fits. This is a communist idea. This is what they all want, and it just doesn't work in the way that they imagine. So who to answer, or to answer who is this aimed at? I think it's aimed to, there's a lot of people who can be swayed by this. I think a lot of the maybe Bernie bros who were wanting to consider voting for Cornel West or Jill Stein would return to the Democratic fold. I think a lot of RFK voters who are, I would not say a lot of, I think RFK voters would have to be of a lowest IQ of the three parties of people who would do this. It's like kind of people who are like, I think I'm independent, I think I'm smart, I think I'm a free thinker, but they don't really actually know anything. And thus they would find this a brilliant idea and they might return to the Democratic Party. I think it would also please a lot of our base. There is a significant number of people who would be won over this. I think a lot of working class voters would be potentially won over to this as well. But, kind of the core professional class, obviously they're more skeptical about it, but I think a lot of them will return to voting for Kamala anyway, just simply because the status it signifies by voting for Trump. They don't want to be associated with that. So it is, I don't think, it is a terrible idea, but it's the worst kind of terrible idea, and that it can appeal to a lot of people. And people are always like saying, "Oh, we need a really value democracy where people really think through these issues, and people aren't just simply being bribed to vote for another candidate." And that's not how our really democracy works. That's not how campaign politics works. You are, in some ways, trying to appeal to the lowest common denominator. And that's what the Democrats are doing. They are having performers, rappers, Megan Thee Stallion and others come to perform, to bring out the crowds. They're utilizing social media influencers to convey a certain vibe around Kamala. They're also using the media itself to convey that vibe. And they're running a vibes-only campaign where this has to be one of her first clear-cut agenda items she's proposing, and it's designed and tailored for the lowest common denominator to get them to vote for her. And I think they're banking on that the population is very stupid and they can be won over by rap performances, social media dances, and promises of a lot of free money and price controls in order to win their vote. And when democracies decline, this is how it works. When in the final days of the Roman Republic, anybody who is wanting to take power, whether it's Sulla or Caesar, they would promise a lot of things for the people, essentially bribing them to gain their support. And that's essentially what politics became like. And even if you look at Latin America, a lot of these guys, like, Trump is comparing Kamala to Maduro and all these other socialists in Latin America. This is how they gain power. They promise to, all these free goodies are going to be for the people as long as you vote for them. And I think as our population changes, we have significant demographic change, we're going to see more campaigns designed like this with appealing to that lowest common denominator. And a lot of these campaigns are going to be designed around upending our constitutional order, our values and traditions, and Kamala is in keeping with that. So I think you probably have a New England refugee has a higher opinion of the voters than I might, but it can create this hesitation to pull the lever for Kamala among some of the middle class voters, which is that their whole campaign is based around. I mean, even picking Tim Walz is about showing like, hey, we picked a normal white guy to be on our ticket, and he's just like you. He likes sports. He's not some soy boy. He hunts, and they have the normal campaign. And this is designed not so much to win over working class whites, but to win over that middle class suburbanite section. But that could impact it. But there are a lot of other voters they might, there could be people who would otherwise not vote, RFK voters, namely, who might be won over by this. Some of the reluctant Bernie bros who don't want to vote for Kamala, they can turn out and support her due to these policies. So going to Tom's question about media criticism of does this show any sign that the media might be turning on her? I've hinted at how they might react to an American Chavez. For those who have not paid close attention to all my takes, last year I wrote an article about American Chavism and how this could be a potential political ideology in our America's future. And what American Chavez would be is essentially a very anti-white Bernie Sanders, that somebody would promise, massive economic redistribution, wealth redistribution, all these types of socialist policies, coupled with very anti-white social policies. They would obviously be supporting reparations. There'd be a very aggressive anti-white attitude towards the core population, among other things. And so that's what American Chavez is. And I think, yes, I think the media would not be fond of a lot of these socialist policies. They weren't that fond of Bernie Sanders. Now, some people will say that they were really negative towards Bernie, and Bernie they were more hostile towards than Trump, there were some people who were claiming this in 2016. Obviously, by Trump's presidency, that was incorrect. But even in 2019, people would still claim that. But they were not fond of Bernie. They were very much more critical of Bernie than they were of any other 2020 candidate. They weren't that thrilled with him in 2016. They were not giving him the room service treatment that they will for every other Democratic candidate. So they don't like the Bernie stuff. They don't like the socialist stuff that much. They would prefer a more moderate, more establishment Democratic Party that just focuses on winning over this urban middle class, professional class, which is what journalists are a part of. And they're fine with higher taxes and some redistributive policies. They'll sometimes even, entertain reparations. But going full on, like Hugo Chavez, they're not going to be a part of. They're not going to go for that. And so they would be more critical of that. But they would never be as critical of that as they would of just any Republican. They are still more critical of Mitt Romney 2012 than they are of Bernie Sanders. But they express this in more skepticism and hesitation. They're not as unrelentingly hostile towards them as they are to Republicans. But they're still not going to be that enthusiastic, and they will still be like, this is really stupid policies, or these are bad policies, and they would document how they don't like them, but they're not going to go full on negative. Maybe if they were worried that they're actually going to take power, they might be in that regard. But if there was like a 2016 race between Trump, Bernie, they would have sided with Bernie. 2020, same deal. They would have sided with Bernie. Now, if it was Bernie versus, say, Jeb Bush or Marco Rubio, and this is like Marco Rubio 2016, that would probably be the fairest coverage they ever have for a presidential campaign as in modern history. They would definitely be critical of both, and you would have a lot more, you would see weird stuff. I could see the New York Times editorial board and Post editorial board endorsing Rubio or Jeb Bush in those circumstances. So there is that. They would definitely not be fond of it. The American media, news media, would be opposed to it, which would, does give it, does hinder it to a certain extent. Because there's not as, the new left-wing media, it's not as big of a space as new right media or conservative media. Even if you look at the big left-wing guys, it would be Vaush, Hassan, Piker, a few other people. Some of the people, Democracy Now! Is still around, but I don't think that has much of a younger audience. It's like these streamer types that are a part of it. They don't really have, a Fox News equivalent, a talk radio equivalent. They don't even really have a Breitbart equivalent, because even those sites that maybe you would have thought of as more far left, like Salon, they still back, the establishment liberals over the socialists. Salon would probably be more friendly to a Bernie Sanders type than maybe, CNN, but it's still not like a full-on like Breitbart type thing. They don't have a Daily Wire, and even their figures are not as influential. Like, the Daily Wire personalities, right-wing influencers, have more impact on the Republican Party than these left-wing influencers do. Even the Young Turks has. There had been a point where you could say the Young Turks had a significant amount of influence over Democrats, but that's not the case anymore. I still think there's a wide base of support for this, and it's not being reflected by the Democratic Party, is that the base is to the left of the Democrats, while the Republican base is right there with them, or in some cases, it's all over the place. But I think the base is, the general normie offline base is generally more aligned with the Republican Party than I think it's becoming clear with some of the younger base with the Democrats. Is that, you can just see this in Palestine over those issues there. You can see it in a lot of the economic issues. They're much more Bernie Sanders aligned than what the establishment is. Meanwhile, the Republican base wants Trump, and guess what? They have Trump. So against the establishment's wishes, but now Trump is increasingly becoming the establishment. So you have those stances there with the two parties, but I don't know. That's to my point. Yes, I think it indicates how the news media would cover an American Chavez, and you can even see that of how the type of coverage they have for Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush, which at times, for Cori Bush at least, because she's a black woman, there's a little bit different hagiography that they have for black women versus black men. And they would at times be like, Cori Bush is awesome. But other times they'd be like, she's kind of a moron. So they weren't as thrilled with them as they would have been with, a standard Democrat liberal. So you have those issues that are at play. So now we're going to bring the topic of calling Kamala a communist. Whether this is effective, whether this is true, how this will play out. So Trump is now calling her a communist. He even released an AI image, or they're saying this is an altered image. It's not real. Of at the DNC they have, the Soviet flag and all the red flags around, and she is a communist, and they're really running on this issue. Now, I've been saying that they need to portray Kamala as a radical, as an extremist. So this is part of that. But is specifically the communist attack line going to latch on? And I don't doubt, when Trump comes up with this stuff, but it almost sounds anachronistic to Americans when they hear communists. or that somebody's accused of being a communist. It's like almost calling someone a monarchist, even though communism still technically around. I mean, you have it in China still likes to call itself communist. There's still several people, several voters within their lifetimes where they had to experience communism or were afraid of communism. But it doesn't really resonate in the same way that even calling someone a fascist, because comparison between fascism and communism, last fascist regime went down nearly 80 years ago versus communism, which you still technically have communist regimes in Cuba, North Korea, China, technically Vietnam too. You can even call Venezuela sort of communist. Socialist probably more accurate, but still in the same wavelength. You can point to this, but within the public discourse and political discourse, it is something that has been buried. It's no longer you have to worry about it. And calling someone a communist just seems out of place with today. Now, fascist, which should be seen as out of place, there hasn't been really a serious fascist threat in 80 years. It carries more weight because that is seen as the greatest moral evil, is to be a fascist or a Nazi. And there's way more media dedicated towards it. There's a World War II movie out every year, multiple ones where the Nazis are the bad guys. There are several video games out there portraying Nazis as the bad guys. There's comic book movies where Nazis are the bad guys, even with Marvel movies. And Nazis are bad. Or the ultimate bad in our society. And it's like why everyone tries to call each other Hitler rather than Stalin or Lenin. Everyone's trying to make the comparisons to Hitler. And when conservatives want to complain about liberals and their big government policies or whatever, they call them Nazis rather than communists because it resonates more with the public. And this is not a good thing. I'm just saying how this is with the public and how the public has been trained. There's just a more powerful effect there. Now, it is a little too heated for a presidential candidate to call someone a Nazi or a fascist. Even though I think Democrats are increasingly calling Trump a fascist because, the media has been calling him a fascist ever since he came down the escalator 9 years ago. So it has a little bit more power. It has a little bit more potency. It doesn't come off as kookery. So, but they would not go as far as to call Trump a direct Nazi, but they'll say he's friends with Nazis. Charlottesville, he did that. That was so bad. He defended the Nazis at Charlottesville. That must make him a Nazi sympathizer, but he's also has these fascist tendencies. He's going to destroy democracy and all this stuff. And it sticks. And conservatives, in trying to do their own type of judo here, is like, well, you're calling us Nazis, so we're going to call you communists. But communist doesn't have the same power. Communism is now seen not as so much of a threat or as a great moral evil, but just something simply from the past, that's in the past. It's like worrying about Wilhelmina, Germany, or King George in this respect. If people just think it as the past, it's now something quaint. It's something to make jokes about. For the millennials in the audience, there would have been the Communist Party t-shirts where people would wear those around. And they were really lame, and it'd be like Marx and Lenin and everyone partying. These were really lame t-shirts, but those were popular. And so were the Che Guevara shirts. And it just doesn't have that terrifying aura in our society as the ultimate evil. And so when you call someone a communist, they're just like, they kind of just scratch their head and they're just like, I don't know about that. And Kamala, even with the price controls and stuff, she doesn't really fit this because she's just simply just saying whatever she wants to get elected. She just can't implement the price controls. Like, it's just something to bribe voters and to dupe them into getting along with her agenda. And for most people, they're not going to believe that she's a communist. Now, if he's running against Bernie or AOC, I think it would have a lot more potence to call them a communist. But with Kamala, just the impression of her is not a communist. And it just strikes people as the Kamala, as the Harris campaign loves to say, as weird. Now, I think Trump can get away with it, and it's fine, because Trump's Trump. People always worried about him. I've heard people say, like, he needs a more disciplined campaign. He needs to be more message. Stay on message. They have been saying this stuff since 2015. It doesn't matter. He won in 2016. And depending on who you ask, he might have won in 2020. But even if even if you believe the election results, it's extremely close, and Trump was being Trump the whole time. And now it's like people are worried. It's like, oh no, he's calling out her racial identity. Oh no, he can't call her communist and all this stuff. There's things to worry about is when he goes off message that pisses us off, like him saying that, we need to let more people in here, which I don't know what the hell he's saying. I mean, that's the stuff you need to call him out on. Trump, I don't get what he's saying there, but I mean, if you look at the campaign agenda and the people advising him, they are not advocating for letting more people in, but he still should be criticized for that and say, like, hey, that's not the message we want to hear. As I've always said, I think if he goes really offline and saying something like that, his rambling and sounding like he wants more legal immigration, then yeah, you need to call him out on it. Are the green cards, stapling green cards to diplomas? That's also worth calling out. But at the same time, a lot of this is just rambling. A lot of this is just Trump, shooting the shit. I remember it one time in early 2019 where it sounded like he was going to go pro real legal immigration. Instead, his administration began restricting illegal immigration. So you just sometimes have to have some faith in Trump that things will work. But I don't think it's that big of a problem with Trump, because Trump always makes these claims. But it's more of an issue with conservatives and the campaign going along with it and trying to be like Kamala A Communist, because it's not going to really work. I mean, I think you do have to portray her as more extreme than Biden. And it's not so much that you're going to dissuade people, it's just that it's not going to have the effect you think. It doesn't have this judo effect where it's like, they're calling us fascists, so we're going to call them communists. It doesn't really work. The fascist angle works more effectively in our society, not for really stupid reasons. I think it is very stupid, but we have to be honest with ourselves. That's the way it is. And so it doesn't quite work when you say that with Kamala. And Kamala is just not a communist. I mean, she's just not one. Not even really a socialist. She is just a standard establishment liberal who is just running to gain power to provide the patronage that Democrats want. I mean, and when she's in office, she'll definitely be, I think, more radical or be capable of more extreme actions than Biden, because she won't be senile, and thus she will take more dramatic actions than Biden will, because I think Biden would just, he kind of let his deputies run things, and sometimes his deputies would be more moderate than him, and he would just take a nap or do whatever. But Kamala would be a more hands-on president, and that would be more disastrous for this country. And I think she'd be more willing to do things that Biden was just too out of touch to even contemplate. So there's that. And Kamala does have... Kamala is more extreme and more radical than Biden is. And I think the people that she's surrounding herself with are more radical and extreme than Biden, are Biden's advisors. But I don't think it's as I don't think the communist line is as strong as it should be, or as strong as people think it will be. Now, Trump, just let Trump be Trump on that. But I think the others should just hammer in on how under her system the economy is going to plummet. She's going to let in even more illegal immigrants. She's going to give them all amnesty. She's going to be friendly to criminals. She's going to consider reparations. All of these things, that's fine. And I think you can just point out that she'll make inflation worse. She'll make, increase taxes. These are kind of the basic things that will win over voters, and portraying her as more extreme. So on one hand, I like the communist thing because it is moving towards a sort of coherent message of that she's far more radical than Biden, and more dangerous to our country than Biden, and she could set off World War III or something, you know, that's that. But I'm just saying I don't think the communist branding is really working. Now, going to a bigger point is that the right really wants to believe what it's up against is a far left menace or a communist threat. Because if we're paired up against a, you know, rather boring liberals, it doesn't really create the justification for our radical ideas. Is that you need a far left menace that's going to do very extreme and dramatic things in order to have a justification and have the credibility to want a radical response in turn. So all these people, they were like, we're in a constitutional crisis. We're really not. We're, you know, everything is in threat. Well, I mean, normies don't feel that way. And we need, you know, a Red Caesar to take total power. But it's like, what is the crisis that the Red Caesar is responding to? Now, for the right, they want to just act like communists are about to take charge. You know, they look back in history. You know, they're looking at the Bolshevik Revolution or Franco's Spain, you know, the Spanish Civil War. And they're like, we're right now at that point. But we're not at all. There's not. The liberals, the libtards are unfortunately not communists. It'd be much better if they were, because if we were up against Cori Bush's and Jamal Bowman's and, you know, Brandon Johnson, the mayor of Chicago, and that was the leadership, and that they were about to take charge, we could frighten people into, you know, adopting more radical ideas in order to prevent that. And, you know, wanting to have some of that conservative authoritarianism that people are into, or just even being more supportive of, you know, even more supportive of mass deportations and really wanting immigration restriction, because immigration restriction was passed in 1924 due to the Red Menace over the Red Scare. Is that people were like, all these immigrants are coming here and they're communists and anarchist terrorists. We're seeing what's happening in Russia, and we don't want that here. And that convinced a lot of people that we need immigration restriction, and that's how it happened. And so if you're seeing that a lot of these new immigrants who are coming here are adopting far left beliefs and becoming extremists, then that creates the upsurge in popular approval for immigration restriction and a lot of other things. You know, it could create a support for stronger policing and other things we want. So that's how you generate greater support for a true right-wing system. But without that, you're left with pretending Biden's a communist. And it's like the issue with Walz and Harris-Walz ticket is that Republicans are struggling to make her out to be this great threat, which I think she is a pretty big threat, but she doesn't rise to the type of threat we need in order to run the campaign that a lot of right-wingers want. And she's starting to get there with the price controls, but still, it still hasn't seeped into the public to where they view her as this great threat, and that she's going to topple everything we believe in, and it's going to usher in a radical new order. It hasn't hit yet. And so we're still struggling, and so we're hoping that the communist line works, and I'm not sure. I don't think it is. I think they're going to have to go to something else. If it becomes a campaign versus Harris-Walz, normal versus the weirdos, and then the Republicans are running on how she's a communist, it further reinforces the idea we're the weirdos and they're the normal status quo party. And they can be like, look at how oddball these guys are. And they can portray us as kooks and cranks. And as I said, they want a vibes-based campaign. And that helps the vibes-based campaign. So you have to go on the specifics, I think, and how this is more dangerous and extreme without going into portraying the DNC as a Soviet rally from the 80s or something. That's just not going to work. Now it's going to may excite our own side, which a lot of our own side thinks it's all about kind of winning over a conservative media audience, which it's not going to be. You're going to have to go with a different campaign. And it's really about frightening the independents and some of the middle-class suburbanites into feeling that things are going to be much worse under Kamala, and that's why you should vote for Trump. But if the line of messaging helps solidify the message that Kamala wants, is that you're the weirdos and we're the normal people, then it's not the best line to take. So I don't think she is really a communist. And it just has the problems with it. But the right is more eager for the left to be communist than the left is themselves. Because a radical left makes it easier for there to be a radical right in response. And if there's not that much of a radical left, then there isn't as much appetite for a radical right among the general population. And so that's why I think we need more of a Bernie types. We need that American Chavez to come around, because then you will have something like an American Franco that will emerge in response, or there will be more of an appetite among ordinary Republicans and a lot of ordinary Americans for something more dramatic than don't rock the boat and we just want the status quo. Which is right now is, Kamala is running a weird campaign where she is pretending to be the change candidate, but at the same time, it is just promising the status quo. And it's like saying, we're just normal, ordinary people. We just need to tweak a few things and not let the weirdos take over who are just going to do a lot of strange things. And that's the message that they want to run on, and maybe it will work. But we'll see more this week at the DNC, what they try to run on, what they're going to campaign on, and how it's like. I mean, we haven't had a real DNC since 2016. 2020 they did the Zoom DNC, which just was not very invigorating. Well, this year it's a real in-person, so you're going to see a lot of how the left is transforming and the current state of it, and what speeches they want to hammer and what message that they want to get across. And unfortunately for the right, it's probably not going to be communism. It's something much more boring and benign. It's just standard. It's really the white dudes for Harris. It is, we're pro-free market to a certain extent, but you're paying more taxes. We're just the normal status quo, don't rock the boat, but at the same time we're acknowledging our white privilege and feeling that we owe non-whites something, and that's why we need to restore affirmative action and bring in more immigrants and all these types of things, and maybe even consider reparations or some form of reparations. And that's really more of it than something that would have been imagined by Lenin. So that is my thoughts on that topic. So we'll go to the rest of the Cod of Elite questions now. So we got a question from K-Max. K-Max asks, Scott, your comparison to Jordan Peterson by Richard Hanania, would you say that comparison is that you just do not want white identity to go into the weird direction? The biker gang meme where white identity goes into tattoos, piercings, trade school obsession, and cheering for worse is better, that like Kamala Harris winning so they can start some sort of revolution. Scott, you instead try to give a better way to act, a way to dress, a way to come off as normal, while still valuing white identity and importance without all the baggage. Well, I think people didn't really understand the comparison. Was he's just simply saying, I think it's his own type of joke, where, I offer life advice sort of through the Greer pledge, and the same way that Jordan Peterson did through his 12 rules for life, where it's namely clean your room and all that type of stuff. I would that's all it meant. There was people who are like, I would take this as a great insult. I had some reply guy who's always trying to get mad about things I've been saying and whatever, and so there were these guys who would just like come into my mentions who are like, oh, this totally discredits you. You need to retire now for being compared to Jordan Peterson. This is a great insult, which clearly, it's not like saying I'm a drug addict who's constantly crying on camera and having mental breakdowns. It's just simply saying that, in Hanania's own joking fashion, that I am offering rules for life or things to avoid and to make yourself a better person and more normal person. So that would just simply be the comparison there. And that's why I joked that we need 12 keys for Greer heads in order to argue for a better life in the way that Jordan Peterson is. that's all the comparison that you had is that the Greer pledge is life advice in the same way 12 rules for life is, and Hanani was making a joke, and some people didn't really get it or decided to decide that it was a great insult, that it was time to retire, and now it was for my reply guys to take over my position, so they can advocate for Ron DeSantis or whatever, and Trump losing. I don't know what they want. I don't know what they want at this point, but the Trump losing, it seems to be a common thread among all these types. So that's all it was. I thought it was a funny comment. I don't see myself as Jordan Peterson of the far right of any sort, but maybe we could make that way. Maybe we could have a better rules for life, much better than Jordan Peterson's, a self-help guide, because those do sell a lot, and I think mine would probably be a lot better than others, because I'm not trying to grift or lie to people or suggest anything off the wall, and I'm once again not a pill popper or someone struggling with mental breakdowns and I don't know, a lot of the goofiness that Jordan Peterson's involved in. So maybe I should write that book someday and transform young Americans into Greer heads. Maybe we can make that happen. Now we've got 2 questions from Dollar Bill, and these will be the final questions for today. He said, in the wake of Roe v. Wade being overturned, why is the pro-life movement proved to be so ineffective at persuading the public to their point of view? Recently, they have been so impotent that they can't get abortion bans passed, even in deep red states like Kansas. The debate over abortion has been going on my entire life, yet I don't remember abortion ever being this popular. Well, I don't think it's that the public began to care more about this issue. This was not an issue that the public greatly cared about up until it was threatened to be taken away, or it was on the ballot. Because before it was just something that both sides would talk about, but nothing would happen with it. You know, red states would try to pass some restrictions on it, but they would be shot down in court, or, you know, they would make it harder for Planned Parenthood to start up in the state. You know, they would do these types of restrictions, but it was very much at the bottom of voter concerns. It's still, you know, pretty close to the bottom of voter concerns, but the issue is that there's now a lot of people who wouldn't have otherwise voted who are now voting Democrat because they think that Republicans are going to take away their birth control, and they're taking away their women's rights, so they're going to vote for Democrats. So there's a couple things here. One is the pro-life movement spent all its efforts at taking over the Republican establishment, or making the Republican Party follow their dictates and follow their party line at what they want to happen. And they made the Republican Party far more pro-life than it was at any point. You still had pro-abortion Republicans in the 70s, 80s, 90s, still even into the 2000s. You really haven't had that many in the 2010s. I think John McCain at some point, you know, you could see this in the presidential candidates from 2008 to 2016, is that 2008, John McCain had at some points been pro-choice. He had to run as pro-life. Same with Mitt Romney. He had to do that. And then it was the same with Trump. They all had to follow that pro-life line. And that was showing how much power they had over the Republican Party and the right. Meanwhile, the country was transforming in a direction that made it more pro-choice or more pro-abortion. Church attendance was going down. These very solid Catholic communities that they could be motivated to care about abortion and were mobilized to vote Republican or vote for a conservative candidate in the 70s and 80s and 90s began to decline. They don't really exist in the same way that they did 50 years ago. Because when abortion came out, you know, it was a very potent issue for the right. And there were a lot of campaigns where, you know, Bob Dole, I think Bob Dole was he was a senator in 74, and he had to run a campaign in that year, which was the year of Watergate, and he was able to survive by, you know, appealing to these strong Catholic communities and saying his opponent was pro-abortion, and that helped him secure his seat. in a year that was very bad for Republicans. And there were still other races like that in the 70s and 80s and 90s where it would prove to be a very solid issue for conservatives. But we really haven't seen it be that strong of an issue in a general election for Republicans in at least 15 years. I think the last time they tried to make it an issue, it turned out to be not work out for Republicans, because when Ralph Northam, who was the previous governor of Virginia in 2019, they were having state legislative elections that year, and Republicans were trying to retain the majorities. I think they still had majority in one chamber, but anyway, they ran hard on how Northam approves abortion up to the moment of birth. Democrats had an extremely good year that year, so it didn't turn out to help them that much. And that's the last time I can think that they really ran on the issue, and it turned out to not be help them. So the country has moved in a direction where they're going to be less open to these arguments, and we're becoming a much more culturally libertarian country where you can do whatever you want with your body, and it's all about individual right and choice. And that explains why more people are open to drug legalization, sports betting legalization. Everyone's getting tattoos and stuff. And it's harder to impose social standards and norms on people. Everyone wants to, you're an individual person. You can make your own way. And that includes abortion. And abortion is, even though a lot of Americans would see that as something wrong with it, or something you don't want to celebrate, or something you would avoid, they still wanted to keep it as a right because, and this is the case with all Americans, it is very hard to give Americans a right and then to take it away. Think of it as like giving a toy to a kid. The kid might not play with the toy all the time. But if he sees you take away the toy and it's like, you're no longer playing with this, the kid's going to have a meltdown and get mad. And that's what you can see with the general public. If you give them a toy and they like the toy, it's very hard to take it away from them, and they're going to punish. And so it's the same with rights. You can't suddenly give them rights and then take it away. That's why it's always very bad when you see this marijuana legalization and the sports betting legalization, because once that becomes entrenched as a right that they feel entitled to, and then taking that away, that really pisses off the public. And you're seeing that with abortion, and it also becomes a bigger issue because you can tie that in with women's rights and women's, the feeling that women have of being equal or whatever, having full rights, is predicated on abortion rights or having access to abortion. And to take that away, a lot of women are convinced that, like, oh, I'm less than equal person. I don't have control over my own body. I don't have rights to my own body. And thus, they are going to vote Democrat and be opposed to it. And so the pro-life movement doesn't have a real message for it because it's very religiously inclined while we're having very secular population. And also they have to just, even the arguments they want to use, it's like, well, it's racist. Black baby lives matter. This stuff doesn't really catch on. They have to appeal to that. And then they could just say, well, what about the life, the individual rights of the fetus, which that's not really catching on either. So the general public is primed to not be open to a pro-life message because it's just a completely different country from it was in the 1970s, where you had much higher church attendance and you had these common values that you could have appealed to. But even at that time, organized churches, even very conservative churches, were not as pro-life as they were now. The Southern Baptist Convention had official, statements saying that, it's okay in certain cases. And then it only changed due to, joining the religious right and, the influence of Catholics that it changed into a different direction. So, but the general public wasn't really fond of it, and you could have convinced them to do this. So it's just the simple fact that the pro-life movement had done a very good job of duping Republicans and conservatives into thinking that they were winning over young people and that the majority of women were on their side, and that everything that they had been claiming turned out to be completely false. And they also don't have the constituency and the the money and other types of support that other lobbies do and other interest groups do, and they're really showing their very weak hand they have in politics. But the last thing they have is very, there's a ton of conservative commentators where they're very into this issue, and there's a ton of conservative organizations that are very into this issue, and they could still wield that elite influence to pressure the GOP into adopting their line, but they're having much less effect on it because the general public is having a different opinion, a very different opinion on it. And this is happening while the public's reaction towards abortion is completely out of sync with what the pro-life movement is. It is, at the same time, it's like the one conservative issue that liberals are fine with them sticking with. Like, it doesn't create the type of controversy that anti-immigration views do, or any type of racial views do in the same regards with abortion, or especially on anything gay related. It's much less controversial to be pro-life. And it's much easier for a mainstream newspaper columnist to write a pro-life column than it is for them to write an anti-immigration column. And so it's much more culturally acceptable to be pro-life. No one gets canceled for being pro-life. I mean, there are the examples of the pro-life demonstrators who are violating the law by, and it's a stupid law where they're getting too close to the door, and thus that results in serious prison sentence, which that needs a reform. But in terms of social cancellation of like people losing their jobs or whatever, simply for being pro-life, that doesn't happen in the same way it does with identity issues. Even being hard on crime, anti-crime is more controversial, because there are people who got fired for condemning the BLM riots. No one has ever been fired for saying abortion is bad on their private account. So this happened at the time where they were allowed to promote their views much more so than other right-wing constituencies. Even gun rights. Gun rights is a more controversial issue and creates more problems for cancellation and stuff. So they're allowed to push for this, but they haven't, and I think that's more due to the country than the pro-life movement itself. But within the own bubble of conservative movement, they were able to dupe themselves into believing that they were much more popular than they actually were, and thus we see the results coming from the elections of that misguided direction, or that delusion that they had. So in conclusion, it's very hard to get the general public to be fervently pro-life when they see it as an individual rights issue, and as a country, individual rights are the most important thing. People feel that they have this right, and it's tied in with women's rights and their feeling of being equal or whatever. And to take that away upsets people, because it's like, it's one of our rights. You can't tell us how to live our lives. If we want to smoke weed and have tattoos and get an abortion, we're going to do so, and that's our rights. And you're going up against that attitude, especially a much more secular population, where it's hard to even convey why they should be pro-life. So I don't know if it would be so much the fault of the pro-life movement as just general social changes that made the public less inclined to be pro-life. And the pro-life movement doesn't do any of its favors by, all their content and propaganda being only designed for themselves and to talk within their own bubble rather than to talk to the general population. Because if you go to like LifeSite News and stuff, it's only for the hardcore converted, and that anyone outside of it would find a lot of their stuff pretty strange. Sometimes they're just like celebrating anything. It's like, they just have very strange content at these places. And so it's just general appeal. It happens a lot with political communities, is that they view their own bubble as the general public or the silent majority, and then the general public is completely different from what the bubble is like. All right, and his second question is, Europeans like to claim that the U.S. is such an inherently right-wing country that the most leftist American politicians would be considered moderates in the European political scene. You've probably seen them say stuff like, in Denmark, Bernie Sanders would be considered a centrist. Is there any truth to this? With some of their economic policies, I guess. I don't know. The thing is like we have we talk about issues differently here than that they do in Europe. Gun rights is not even an issue there. Everyone is for gun control. I guess there might be a few nationalists who want some loosening of the laws. Abortion is not even an issue there. It's whether the government will fully fund abortion. That's like only stuff that they'll even talk about. There's no talks about banning it. Even the type of the gay marriage stuff was more of an issue than I think Americans would have realized, but it still doesn't quite have the type of resonance that it would here. But there's times that there be more right-wing than us. I think the immigration line of these nationalist parties is to the right of the Republican Party. I think there's greater support for, stuff like remigration that there is in America. The mass deportations isn't quite remigration, because remigration is even suggesting that we're going to deport people who have citizenship in these countries or legal residents, which even with the mass deportations, it's solely for the gigantic illegal immigration population we have. There's also not really hawkishness because, Europeans don't really have military. In the same way that America does. They will have hawkishness, but it's almost like we're demanding America send even more troops to us rather than we're going to send our troops somewhere else. So it's just a different political structure. I think it's also just a lack of awareness of what issues really motivate us. They don't have the type of quite the identity politics that we do here. If a lot of Europeans are shocked at the idea of affirmative action, they're like, we would never do something like this. And then here in America, it's in every industry and it's in every, factor of our life. And you have an entire party built to dedicate it towards it. So that would be something that's even more left-wing. Or just even the standard of just like having to appeal to all these different interest groups that are part of the identity politics bloc. You could argue that America is further afield than Europe because we have much greater degree of diversity and multiculturalism. And even though some of these left-wing parties will appeal to, some of the immigrant blocs, but there is a more awkwardness there and a little bit more tension because the immigrants clearly don't like the LGBT stuff and they don't like some of the other progressive stuff. They'll vote for the left-wing party, but it's an even more uncomfortable coalition than it is in America. So I don't really believe that with Europeans. It's always a claim made by left-wingers in America and Europeans, and it's based on ignorance of what American politics are like. And even when Americans make it, it's an ignorance of like the differences between Europe and America. I think maybe pre-Trump, or really the pre-migrant crisis, maybe you could argue this, because a lot of the nationalist parties they were having decent performances, but they were not really in the state of power, and so you were debating between a center left and a center right that in American politics, they would be virtually the same on a lot of the social issues, or they would be on the same page as the Democrats of the social issues. They would be merely arguing over some of the economics. And even some of the center-right parties were, they didn't really have the libertarian factions and libertarian focus economically that some of the Republicans had. So it depends. So if you're like in 2012 and you think what far-right means is like total free market principles and pro-life and pro-gun, then yeah, you could see that like, wow, the Republican Party is way to the right of the Republicans in France, I think had a different name, but of Sarkozy's party, or the Christian Democrats in Germany. They're like, and definitely the Tories. They're way to the right of them. But if you think that the issues are immigration and those things, I even think back then it would have been that the center-right parties were more to the right than the Republican Party. CDU, Merkel's party, was pretty good on immigration up until, or I wouldn't say pretty good, but okay on immigration, up until the migrant crisis where she let them all in. And even the center right in France was sort of okay. They were not proposing in the same way that, you know, Republicans of 2013 were like, we need an amnesty and we need to bring more people in. A lot of them weren't that keen on this. And so you had those things. So it just depends on what you consider far right and what's right wing. And a lot of Europeans think like far right is some of the economic proposals that Republicans have, the gun stuff, abortion, and to them this would strike them as right wing. But I think some of the immigration rhetoric and the identitarian stuff has more resonance in Europe, even though Trump is, you know, there is pushing towards it, but I don't think it's still to the same extent that it is in Europe. And so that would be where the parties are to the right of the Republicans. So the one thing you could say is that both the Republicans on certain issues are to the right of their counterparts in Europe, but at the same time, the Democrats are to the left of their counterparts in Europe as well. But it just depends on, like, the race stuff. Democrats are definitely to the left of the center left in Europe. I mean, even though Macron is more center than, you know, center left, or they say it, but we'll say he's center left. But I mean, he defended all the statues in France. It's like, we're not going to undergo, and he was like strongly criticizing wokeness, and he's cracking down hard on Islam. You know, no Democrat would ever dare do that in our country. And the same with like defending affirmative action and wanting more affirmative action. I even think the type of, you know, the white dudes for Harris and stuff, where they're all acknowledging their white privilege and they all have breakout sessions for their own identity group. I know that there's a certain extent that this is happening in Europe, but I think it's taken to the next degree here in America. So that makes it more of an issue. So that would be my take on it. I think it's still a dumb point to make, and you really have to specify what they mean. And so if anyone ever says that, I think it's to ask, like, what do you mean by that? And let them explain. And then you could offer the explanation where it's like, well, it's not quite the case that we have, or it's like what issues you care about. The places where I would say it's most true is where it's a largely two-party system. So I would say UK, yes, it's more true. But the place where it's most true is Canada. The Conservatives are Democrats there. And really the only party that's even equivalent to Republicans is the PPC, the People's Party of Canada, which gets like 1 or 2%. And even Trudeau's party is like, you know, almost Bernie tier stuff, or maybe even Kamala, or like a very left-wing more, but not quite redistributive policies. And then they have an even further left party. So you have like a center-left party in the Conservatives, a left party in the Liberals, and then a far-left party in the New Democratic Party. So I would say in Canada it's most true. UK to a lesser extent, but I don't think it's completely different politics in continental Europe, so it's hard comparison to make. And so that's my answer to that question. And that is it for the Highly Respected today. We've got more great content coming up this week, so be on the lookout for that. So until next time, stay respected.